Hi everybody and welcome to IT 604 IT Project Management. This is our week 4 online WebEx meeting. This week we are moving from the business case and the statement of work to and the project charter, which you completed last week, to the scope statement, and we are going to move out of the scope statement into already what is called the work breakdown structure. So why is that important? Well, because last week we learned that project scope is not equal to product scope, but that product scope, that is the features and functions that characterize the product, service, or result that your project is supposed to produce, is described in requirements, in the design of the product. We will beginnings in the scope from the project chart and is derived from there. From there, we build a deliverable definition table or a deliverable structure chart, which I'm going to show you again as a repetition of last week. We're going to build a context diagram and a use case diagram, both of which you're seeing here. And then we'll talk about the scope change management process real quick before we delve into this week's materials. So a deliverable definition table is typically a tree structure. Please note that the project phases are at the top of the tree. They're much closer to the trunk. Here is where you have your project name, right? And for initiation, planning, execution, monitoring, controlling, closing, and evaluation, later on the lessons learned, this is where we put all the deliverables. That's all the plans and all the documentation that is going to prove that we have completed the project within the acceptable limits that were set to us, into these white boxes. Note also that the product scope here, the SDLC, which is what we use in order to achieve the product scope, is a branch of execution and monitoring and controlling. So in other words, it is a subset of the project management lifecycle. So the SDLC, analysis, design, build, test, and implementation, in other words, also has specific deliverables. One of them, you probably know, will be the completed code, for example. For the test phase here, you could say, well, we're going to build a test plan, like a check sheet, like a verification cross-reference matrix. That's a long word, isn't it? So what are we going to build for the analysis? What are we going to build? What kind of document are we going to build for the design phase? Maybe we should have a design document, don't you think? Probably a good idea, right? So for the data flow diagram here, or the context diagram, it is important to understand that that is a very vital part of the scope statement, because it gives us the first idea of what we're going to build. And what we're going to build is really the center of the scope statement. So also note that the data flow diagram typically is an outgrowth of the business case, in which we've already done most of the technical analysis, so that we know kind of, sort of, what we are going to build and how we're going to build it, how we're going to approach the build. And this is where a data flow diagram comes in. Please note that the system we're building as well. And those are the only things that are allowed to be funded, or that are allowed to be completed within the realm of the project charter. Any changes to any scope, it doesn't matter where it comes from, whether it comes from an engineer, whether it comes from you, whether it comes from an outside stakeholder, have to be documented. But they also have to be described. There has to be a justification of why this scope change is needed. For example, new functionality, additional functionality, maybe less functionality, maybe different functionality, right? Then also it's important to understand that there should be alternatives and different ways in which the scope change can be, for example, in some cases, when a scope change or a structure chart, the context diagram, the use case diagram. In your Blackboard, we have a really good, for the most part, project that is right from Husky Air. And that's what this looks like, the deliverable definition table. And here it is. Yes. So, all right, Pilot Angel scheduling system is at the top of the deliverable definition. And then we have here the 5 project phases, as they are like, we know that the PMI 5 project phases are slightly different. And so, of course, we have status reports, right? Because outside of those status reports in our product cycles, here we have our use cases that come pretty early on in our project here, actually build what we promised, our code, and where we have to make sure this can actually operate our code, and that will, etc. All right. So, coming back to what we actually were going to talk about this week, we wanted to move from the project charter to the project plan by way of the work breakdown structure and project estimation. Now, let's understand that right now we are talking about the final outcome of the project, that to figure out how can we structure our way of getting there, right? So we're going to have to figure out, well, is this a large project? Is this a small project? Depending on organization. And then we need to figure out, well, what at that point we are going to start building a task list. What that's into a work breakdown structure, we want to make sure we know how long each activity takes. And as I already said, that is really intricately connected with who is going to perform the work and where they're going to perform the work as well. So this is where we want to make sure to estimate our activity durations, and this is how we can determine how long everything's going to take. And then, as we will see next week, we're going to develop a schedule, and then we can take that schedule, and every week we check how far are we along, are we behind, are we ahead of schedule, and then we can take the temperature on our project that way. So, now what is a work breakdown structure? A work breakdown structure is a task list. Let's say, for example, here for this task list, build a hospital, or I want to, in which I don't own any buildings yet. So part of my task list is I need to install software so my employees have, a software infrastructure to work with. Then I'm going to have to recruit my operators. I'm going to have to train them. I'm going to have to test the system. I'm going to have to probably test the operators as well to make sure they're appropriate. Woohoo! Here's my task list. Now, building to rent, acquiring a facility, other connected steps. This is where we're breaking it down into individual. So let's take a look here. Here we have our acquire facility, install network, install front, blah, 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 right? So now, as I said already, acquiring a facility, that is finding a building to rent, contains a lot of other steps inside of it. So we're going to untangle these now so we don't forget to do perhaps crucial steps. Here we list. What is it that we want in a building, right? We probably want to evaluate realtors, people who, and so on and so on. Now, as we evaluate our realtors, and this is just an example of building this tree stairs, what are the steps that we need to do? Well, we need to review their portfolio maybe. We need to review their commission structure, be a good rate to pay a realtor to find a building for us, and so on and so on. And as you're seeing here, under point to perform the work, what is their skill level? What is their experience? Are we working with senior engineers, junior engineers, or a mix? Are they going to go on vacation at some point? Because if they're going to be absent when they're needed, then maybe today you promised me you'd work on my project for 2 hours, right? I can insert a task right here, and I can say initiation would be, for example, one of my milestones would be to complete the project charter. Okay, so if I want to complete the project charter in my initiation phase, I can use the little, right? And then I think about all the other tasks that I want to complete in my planning phase. For example, part of my task structure, which hopefully you will start preparing into the project schedule itself. So, since we don't have any meeting participants, I'm going to assume this is going to be a recording. I'm going to make sure to share it, and I wish you a wonderful weekend. Thank you.